Let's start with a quick recap of a point from Lecture 4 in order to avoid confusion. The second wavers gave the name gender to the socialization of the sexes into two different types of persons, and hence many, although not all, were gender abolitionists. But this risks being confusing once we name female socialization femininity and male socialization masculinity, for it is easy to slip into thinking that the feminist project is to abolish femininity and masculinity. It isn't. It is to abolish the tying of these bundles of behaviors to the sexes. We should work through the bundles of behaviors and figure out what is good or useful or benign and make that available to everyone. And the converse, work through the bundles of behaviors and figure out what is bad or useless or malign and make those things available to no one. A clearer name for the topic of this lecture would be compulsory femininity, borrowing from Adrienne Rich's discussion of sexual and romantic behavior, which we'll come back to in Lecture 7. If you're watching this lecture, then you're likely already aware that there are vehemently held opinions about which, if any, of the measurable average sex differences are part of our evolved psychologies and which are better explained by cultural learning. We're going to be facing that issue head on in Lecture 10. For now, I'll suggest that if you are someone with vehement opinions about this, you just consider the ideas here as applying to the parts of the bundle that we call femininity that are not plausibly explained by evolved sex-specific psychology. For example, because they're much too new to be explained in that way. Or if you have some less strongly held opinions, then I'll suggest that you consider, for the sake of argument, the idea that there could be no evolved sex-specific psychology at all, and every average sex difference that we see could be explained by cultural learning, and so importantly, could be otherwise. If that's true, there's serious injustice in the vicinity of sex. First, the frustration of human potential caused by the suppression of some behaviors in some people by reason of their sex. And second, the social hierarchy created by the ordering of male/masculine as superior and female/feminine as inferior once that socialization has been accomplished. Even if you are someone who thinks there is no such injustice because the sexes are naturally different, it will be useful for you to understand what it is your opponents think. All the better to knock their arguments over. I'm going to divide this lecture into 3 parts. The first part will be about the presentational content of femininity, differences between men and women in terms of clothing and comportment and things like that. This in the thumbnail, by the way, was meant to be manspreading, but I did a less than ideal job of translating the reference into cardboard. In Lecture 4, we talked about Marilyn Frye's claim that we are constantly announcing our sex through our dress, comportment, speech, and behavior. Dress, comportment, and speech, at least, are all presentational content. The second part will be about a more psychological or temperamental content to femininity, differences between men and women in interpersonal relations and expectations around care, as cemented in the traditional division of labor into breadwinner homemaker roles. In Lecture 4, we talked about Simone de Beauvoir's claim that the female is socialized into passivity, coquetry, or motherhood. These are examples of psychological, temperamental, or behavioral content. And in the third part of the lecture, we'll turn to an empirical approach to femininity, looking at the perception of and conformity to gender norms in the best ranked country in the world for gender equality. The point being, if there's still a problem even there, there's still a problem everywhere. I want to start with a short story by the feminist author Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who was writing in early 1900s America. The story, called If I Were a Man, was published in 1914. Gilman starts with pretty little Molly Mathewson, wife of Gerald, then imagines Molly suddenly becoming Gerald, yet retaining a memory of herself as Molly too. If ever there was a true woman, it was Molly Mathewson. Yet she was wishing heart and soul she was a man. And all of a sudden, she was. Some of you might be familiar with John Locke's Prince and Cobbler thought experiment, where the minds and bodies swap over, the prince's mind in the cobbler's body and the cobbler's mind in the prince's body. the new Gerald/Molly person is not like that. We don't have Molly's mind in Gerald's body or Gerald's mind in Molly's body. Rather, we have Molly's mind as a kind of tourist in Gerald's body and world, knowing what he knows and feeling what he feels. This is a direct commentary on the different worlds of men and women at the time. Molly and Gerald have had a fight over a bill. Molly brought hats, but did not promptly pass Gerald the bill. Now Gerald is to pay for them. There are three main observations in the story: differences in body, gait, and freedom of movement, differences in style or presentation, and differences in the design of things in the world and who they fit or who they're for. And there is also, as a bonus, an observation of what men think about women. First, body, gait, freedom of movement. Once Molly is Gerald, she is erect and square-shouldered. She feels a difference in size and weight. She feels her long, straight, free legs swung forward at a gait that made her feel as if on stilts. This is partly an observation about the body itself, but partly about clothes and confinement. Gerald, of course, wears trousers, and Gerald has never had to take only the steps permitted by long skirts, nor has Gerald had to think about appearing demure. Gerald has pockets with all the things he needs in them. Thus, he has armored assurance. He is ready to meet emergencies. His shoes are comfortable and he can run and jump in them. Never before since her early school days had she felt such freedom and comfort as to feet. Gilman also observes the separate spheres: women in the domestic sphere of the house and home, and men in the public sphere, the rest of the world. Upon Molly as Gerald catching a train, Gilman writes, "The world opened before her, not the world she had been reared in, where home had covered all the map almost, and the rest had been foreign or unexplored country, but the world as it was, man's world, as made, lived in, and seen by men." Second, style or presentation. This comes mainly through the observation about hats, which had been the subject of the fight between Gerald and Molly. Gerald's view of hats is idiotic, useless, ugly things. Molly suddenly sees a difference she hadn't perceived before, that the men's hats are normal, dignified, and fit well on short hair, so they pose no impediment to men's free action. Whereas the women's are foolish, absurd, like the decorations of an insane monkey. What she has valued and participated in as a woman comes to look ridiculous to her as a man. Here's the passage in full. "With the eyes of a man and the brain of a man, with the memory of a whole lifetime of free action wherein the hat, close-fitting on cropped hair, had been no handicap, she now perceived the hats of women. The massed fluffed hair was at once attractive and foolish, and on that hair, at every angle, in all colours, tipped, twisted, tortured into every crooked shape, made of any substance chance might offer, perched these formless objects. Then on their formlessness the trimmings, these squirts of stiff feathers, these violent outstanding bows of glistening ribbon, these swaying, projecting masses of plumage which tormented the faces of bystanders. Never in all her life had she imagined that this idolized millinery could look, to those who paid for it, like the decorations of an insane monkey." There is also commentary on beauty. Molly is little and pretty. Gilman writes, "Little, of course, no true woman may be big. Pretty, of course, no true woman could possibly be plain." And she goes on describing Molly as whimsical, capricious, charming, changeable, devoted to pretty clothes and always wearing them well, a loving wife and a devoted mother, socially gifted, proud of her home and good at managing it. Molly is a true woman. Gilman writes, "If ever there was a true woman, it was Molly Mathewson." Then third, design of the world. Molly finds that once she is Gerald, everything fits. Her back is the right size for the seat back in the train. Her shoes fit and feel good. And finally, the way men think about women. Gilman notes a two-story department in men's minds, separate from all their other thoughts and ideas, where their thoughts about women are. One half is romanticized, the tenderest emotions, the most exquisite ideals, the sweetest memories, all lovely sentiments as to home and mother, a veiled statue blindly adored. The other half is base, stories told at men's dinners, worse ones overheard in street or car. All of these observations can be thought of as parts of the social construction of women as feminine. His clothes are freeing and empowering, hers are confining and ridiculous. The world outside the home fits him better because he has been the only one in it. He has beliefs about women that justify the status quo, that present her as different, whether he romanticizes or demeans her in that difference. Importantly, he does not see himself as having unjust power and privilege or as subordinating her. He sees them as different and each occupying the role that fit them both. And aside before we move on, Nora Vincent's 2006 book Self-Made Man is the real-life version of Molly/Gerald. Vincent went undercover into men-only social spaces and reported back. In Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, published in 1970, there are sections on curves and hair, and in the section The Stereotype, she's polemical about clothing. The depths of the sea are ransacked for pearl and coral to deck her. The bowels of the earth are laid open that she might wear gold, sapphires, diamonds, and rubies. Baby seals are battered with staves, unborn lambs ripped from their mothers' wombs. Millions of moles, muskrats, squirrels, minks, ermines, foxes, beavers, chinchillas, ocelots, lynxes, and other small and lovely creatures die untimely deaths that she might have furs. Egrets, ostriches, and peacocks, butterflies and beetles yield her their plumage. Men risk their lives hunting leopards for her coats and crocodiles for her handbags and shoes. Millions of silkworms offer her their yellow labours. Even the seamstresses roll seams and whip lace by hand so that she might be clad in the best that money can buy. The men of our civilization have stripped themselves of the fineries of earth so that they might work more freely to plunder the universe for treasures to deck my lady in. She later refers to women as becoming the showcase for wealth and caste. In her 1999 book, The Whole Woman, there are sections on beauty and breasts, where she talks about beauty ideals for women and what we might call the performance of femininity. About beauty, she writes, "Every woman knows that, regardless of all her other achievements, she is a failure if she is not beautiful. She also knows that whatever beauty she has is leaving her stealthily day by day. Even if she is as freakishly beautiful as the supermodels whose images she sees replicated all around her, until they are more familiar than the features of her own mother, she cannot be beautiful enough. There must be bits of her that will not do, her knees, her feet, her buttocks, her breasts." And there's an interesting passage where she talks about herself in relation to the standards of femininity. "Maybe I couldn't make it. Maybe I don't have a pretty smile, good teeth, nice tits, long legs, a cheeky ass, a sexy voice. Maybe I don't know how to handle men and increase my market value so that the rewards due to the feminine will accrue to me. Then again, maybe I'm sick of the masquerade. I'm sick of pretending eternal youth. I'm sick of belying my own intelligence, my own will, my own sex. I'm sick of peering at the world through false eyelashes, so everything I see is mixed with a shadow of bought hairs. I'm sick of weighting my head with a dead mane, unable to move my neck freely, terrified of rain, of wind, of dancing too vigorously in case I sweat into my lacquered curls. I'm sick of the powder room. I'm sick of pretending that some fatuous male's self-important pronouncements are the objects of my undivided attention. I'm sick of going to films and plays when someone else wants to, and sick of having no opinions of my own about either. I'm sick of being a transvestite. I am a woman, not a castrate." What does this mean? I read it as a human masquerading as a stereotype. The stereotype is not real, and a lot of people are being hurt in their attempt to live up to it. It is time to eliminate the stereotype and free the human. In Susan Brownmiller's 1984 book Femininity, the chapters are body, hair, clothes, voice, skin, movement, emotion, and ambition. The way we're dividing things up, we could put emotion and ambition on the psychology/temperament side and everything else on the presentational side. Let's look in more detail at her discussion of clothing. Brownmiller starts by acknowledging the expressive value of dressing feminine. Who would deny that dressing feminine can be quite creative? A woman with a closet full of clothes for different moods and occasions is an amateur actress and a wily practitioner of the visual arts. A grand sense of theatre reposes on that rack of hangers, offering a choice of imaginative roles from sexy vixen to old-fashioned romantic lady. Children of both sexes love to dress up in their mother's costumes, complete with lipstick, handbag, and high heels, because they adore the game of let's pretend. Feminine clothing induces the body to strut about in small, restrained yet show-offy ways. Feminine clothing produces its special feminine sounds, the staccato clickety-click of the heels, the musical jangle of the bracelets, the soft rustle of silk, or, in an earlier era, the whisper of petticoats, the snap of a fan. And the finishing touches, the makeup and perfume, create a distinct, sweet, feminine smell. Like Gilman before her, she notes the restriction on movement that feminine clothing creates, but she acknowledges a wider array of difference that dressing feminine creates, different sounds, different smells. And she notes in describing the compliments that such dressing attracts that men are known to be highly appreciative when a woman has taken the trouble to create an entire human being who looks and acts and smells so different from them. We can assess this claim empirically. What would the penalties have been for a woman at Brown-Miller's time of writing to have not pretended to be an entirely different type of human being? The woman with the hairy legs, the trousers, no perfume, or indeed who is fresh from a workout and has the body odor of a man, who just seems to be altogether too similar to the man for him to deny. And have those penalties disappeared now? Here's Brown-Miller talking about her own reasons for ditching skirts, despite the fact that many feminists of the second wave wore pants for a while, but then returned to dresses. Why do I persist in not wearing skirts? Because I don't like this artificial gender distinction, because I don't wish to start shaving my legs again, because I don't want to return to the expense and aggravation of nylons, because I will not reacquaint myself with the discomfort of feminine shoes, because I'm at peace with the freedom and comfort of trousers, because it costs a lot less to wear nothing but pants, because I remember how cold I used to feel in the winter wearing a short skirt and sheer stockings, because I can still call to mind the ugly look of splattered rainwater on the back of my exposed legs, because I recall the anguish of an unraveled hem, because I remember resenting the enormous amount of thinking time I used to pour into superficial upkeep concerns, and because the nature of feminine dressing is superficial in essence. Even my objections seem superficial as I write them down. But that is the point. To care about feminine fashion and do it well is to be obsessively involved in the inconsequential details on a serious basis. There is no relief. To not be involved is to risk looking eccentric and peculiar, or sloppy and uncared for, or mannish and man-hating, or all of the above. She speculates as to why her friends, in contrast, went back to dresses and skirts. I think my friends returned to dresses because they felt that life was getting grey without some whimsical indulgence in the feminine aesthetic. They missed the frivolous gaiety of personal adornment. They missed the public display of vulnerability and sexual flirtation. And they missed the promised change in appearance that a new dress, and only a new dress, can hold. Some of them had thrived on the newsiness of fashion, the keeping up, the competition. They longed to try the current look. Some of them longed to show off their legs again, and some of them, I know, missed shopping. Straight-legged pants are boring. One cannot take on a new identity by changing trousers. In Brown-Miller's view, it is a point of femininity to mystify or minimize the functional aspects of a woman's mind and body that are indistinguishable from a man's. We are mostly the same, but there is some social interest in maintaining the separation, so femininity minimizes sameness and exaggerates difference. This goes back to Gilman's point about Gerald striding in trousers, and Molly feeling as though she were walking on stilts. As Brown-Miller puts it, expansive, casual body gestures are characterized as immodest and unfeminine when practiced by women, and skirts restrict those large, free movements. One does not stride. One is perpetually reminded to be circumspect when sitting or bending down. Whatever its length and however wide, the open-endedness of a skirt cannot help but guide the body into a set of conservative poses and smaller gestures. And the traditional feminine accessories that went with a skirt in an earlier era, corset, fan, muff, parasol, and shawl, and the shoes and pocketbooks of today have always reinforced those restrictions. She says that functional clothing is a masculine privilege. while to be truly feminine is to accept the handicap of restraint and restriction and come to adore it. This last bit is important. It's not enough to resentfully go along with it, which would suggest that as soon as women didn't have to dress this way, they would stop. No, they come to adore it, so that they choose it long after there is any law or person forcing them or punishing them for deviations. Brownmiller spends some of the chapter on the question of dress reform and feminism, and notes, every wave of feminism has foundered on the question of dress reform. I suppose it is asking too much of women to give up their chief outward expression of the feminine difference, their continuing reassurance to men and to themselves that a male is a male because a female dresses and looks and acts like another sort of creature. The man is secure that he is different because she cooperates in making herself different from him. The suffragettes tried the rational dress, a shorter skirt with pants underneath, which did not take off. The second wavers tried selling a uniform, which somewhat strangely was a dress. This also did not take off. In this connection, Brownmiller also talks about women throughout history who have worn men's clothes. This much can be said. Some women have worn men's clothes to accomplish their work. Some women have worn men's clothes to indicate their temporary or permanent sexual attraction to other women. Some women have worn men's clothes to experience the power and freedom of being a man. Some women have worn men's clothes because they hated their female bodies. Some women have worn men's clothes because they looked so adorable in them. Some women have worn men's clothes because they sought an alternative to the confining clothes they were expected to wear and expected to delight in as women. Brownmiller's overall point is that clothes might indicate a lot of different things: economic status, class aspirations, and political and moral values. But it remains true for all that women's situation is doubly complicated by the feminine goal of appearing expensive, frivolous, sexy, vulnerable, and refined in one package. She says, whatever a woman puts on, it is likely to be a costume, whether it is fur, white lace, a denim skirt, or black leather pants. To repeat, whatever a woman puts on, it is likely to be a costume. Okay, part 2. Talking about the psychological or temperamental content to femininity. Let's start with some dead white men pontificate about women's natures. One of the most famous and influential philosophers of all time was Immanuel Kant, writing in the mid to late 1700s Germany. And I'm following the presentation of Kant's views about women in Beverly Clack's 1999 Misogyny in the Western Philosophical Tradition. In his Of the Beautiful and Sublime, Kant presents a theory of sex complementarity, that male and female have different natures and that these are complementary to one another, like yin and yang. Clack writes that included in the masculine qualities are nobility, depth, reflectiveness, learning, profundity, and the ability to be principled, while included in the feminine qualities are beauty, delicacy, modesty, compassion, sympathy, and feeling. While Kant takes these sets of qualities to be of equal importance, in other work, namely Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, he seems to identify the possibility of moral action with the masculine set. Kant thinks that truly moral action is that which arises from a sense of duty, and that reason is the tool that lets us discover what our duties are. He thinks that doing something because it is pleasurable corresponds more strongly with the feminine traits of having compassion and good-heartedness, while doing something out of duty corresponds more strongly with the masculine traits of deep meditation and long sustained reflection, the abstract speculations of a diligent, fundamental, and deep understanding, which is for Kant the male/masculine understanding. In Clack's view, it is difficult to escape the conclusion that under Kant's schema, women are incapable of acting morally. Their morality arises not from principle, but from emotive responses to situations. He also brings back the woman, nature, man, reason typology, where conquering inclination or nature to obey duty looks in some sense like the masculine triumphing over the feminine. Here's some of that as Kant, or at least his translators, put it. From Of the Beautiful and Sublime, Women have a strong inborn feeling for all that is beautiful, elegant, and decorated. Even in childhood, they like to be dressed up and take pleasure when they are adorned. They have many sympathetic sensations, good-heartedness and compassion, prefer the beautiful to the useful, and gladly turn abundance of circumstance into parsimony in order to support expenditure on adornment and glitter. They have very delicate feelings in regard to the least offence, and are exceedingly precise to notice the most trifling lack of attention and respect toward them. In short, they contain the chief cause in human nature for the contrast of the beautiful qualities with the noble, and they refine even the masculine sex. Deep meditation and a long sustained reflection are noble but difficult, and do not well befit a person in whom unconstrained charms should show nothing else than a beautiful nature. Laborious learning or painful pondering, even if a woman should greatly succeed in it, destroy the merits that are proper to her sex, and because of their rarity, they can make her an object of cold admiration. But at the same time, they will weaken the charms with which she exercises her great power over the other sex. The beautiful understanding selects for its objects everything closely related to the finer feeling, and relinquishes to the diligent, fundamental, and deep understanding abstract speculations or branches of knowledge useful but dry. The virtue of a woman is a beautiful virtue. That of a male sex should be a noble virtue. And from Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, after comparing the man who does good because he finds it pleasurable to the man who drags himself to do good out of duty, he is beneficent not from inclination but from duty. This version of sex complementarity, the beautiful understanding and the deep understanding, sets us up for another version of sex complementarity, namely the breadwinner homemaker roles. In this last bit of part 2, we're considering Nancy Fraser's 1994 paper, After the Family Wage, Gender Equality and the Welfare State. Fraser's project in the paper is to do some big picture thinking about what the new model of the welfare state should be. It was clear at the time that the old family wage model, where there is a male breadwinner at the head of a nuclear family and needing a wage to support that family, was out of date, given women's increased employment and new variations in family structure. Thinking about the content of the homemaker or caregiver role helps us to fill in the content of femininity in the second sense as psychology or temperament or behavior. She was supposed to be caring, loving, supportive, warm. She anticipated and was responsive to the needs of her family members. She prepared meals that provided sustenance and comfort to her family. She kept the home clean and warm in the winter or cool in the summer. She shopped for groceries and looked after pets and did the administration necessary to keep a household running. She had the traits suited to these tasks rather than to the world of work. She, the homemaker, and he, the breadwinner, made an ideal pair and could together raise an ideal family. The two main alternatives to the family wage that had been put forward, Fraser calls universal breadwinner, where instead of breadwinner homemaker pairs, we make everyone breadwinners, and caregiver parity, where instead of working to convert homemakers into breadwinners, caregiving is remunerated by the state, so that caregivers are brought up to parity with breadwinners. That is, more jobs, so everyone works, and caregiving is turned into a job as part of that work through childcare and aged care institutions, or allowances for caregivers that function as a salary would, so that care remains in the family, but women are not dependent on a husband's income to do it. Both alternatives had their critics, with worries that the universal breadwinner alternative accepted the male as the standard, and that caregiver parity kept women in the private sphere. In Fraser's words, feminists have so far associated gender equity with either equality or difference, where equality means treating women exactly like men, and where difference means treating women differently insofar as they differ from men. Theorists have debated the relative merits of these two approaches as if they represented two antithetical poles of an absolute dichotomy. These arguments have generally ended in stalemate. Proponents of difference have successfully shown that equality strategies typically presuppose the male as norm, thereby disadvantaging women and imposing a distorted standard on everyone. Egalitarians have argued just as cogently, however, that different approaches typically rely on essentialist notions of femininity, thereby reinforcing existing stereotypes and confining women within existing gender divisions. Neither equality nor difference, then, is a workable conception of gender equity. Fraser introduces 5 evaluative standards that she thinks any adequate new model of the welfare state should satisfy, assesses both universal breadwinner and caregiver parity in light of them, and argues that neither do particularly well, presenting instead a new third alternative. And what's interesting about this for us is that it A, blows up complementarity, and B, does so in the female typical direction. In other words, it argues that men need to change and become more female typical. So in terms of the reminder that we started with, far from abolishing femininity, this means universalizing femininity so that everyone has these traits. Here, caregiving traits. The evaluative standards she introduces are anti-poverty, anti-exploitation, equality of income, leisure time, and respect, anti-marginalization, and anti-androcentrism. These mean, respectively, wanting a vision for a welfare state that doesn't leave women poor, doesn't leave women at risk of exploitation because poor, doesn't leave women with less income, less leisure time, or less respect than men, doesn't relegate women to a separate sphere, and doesn't assume that men's current life patterns represent the human norm and that women ought to assimilate to them. And she finds both universal breadwinner and caregiver parity to fall short of these standards. As you can see in this figure, universal breadwinner does badly on anti-androcentrism because it accepts the male standard, and on equality of leisure time because women could become breadwinners and still have the second shift of caregiving and homemaking, as they in fact do now. And caregiver parity does badly on anti-marginalization and income equality because it leaves women in the caregiving sphere, and because even if there is state financial support for caregiving, it could still be a lot less than breadwinner jobs, and so leave income inequality in place. She does note, however, that both alternatives would be an improvement on the then status quo in terms of pulling women out of poverty and away from risk of exploitation. Fraser says that a third possibility is to induce men to become more like most women are now, that is, people who do primary care work. Men doing their fair share in terms of care work will end the second shift, and so equalize leisure time and eliminate androcentrism, improving the breadwinner alternative, and would be more likely to then equalize income and reduce women's relegation to a separate sphere, improving the caregiver parity alternative. The world of work and the world of care and home must be integrated for both sexes, so that everyone is doing both, Fraser thinks. She writes, "The construction of breadwinning and caregiving as separate roles, coded masculine and feminine respectively, is a principal undergirding of the current gender order. To dismantle those roles and their cultural coding is in effect to overturn that order. It means subverting the existing gender division of labor and reducing the salience of gender as a structural principle of social organization. At the limit, it suggests deconstructing gender. In case this word deconstructing is throwing you off, it means something similar to gender abolition. Gender is socially constructed, and we must now deconstruct it." This is not quite universal caregiver, the converse of universal breadwinner, because the idea isn't that everyone cares and no one works, where it was the idea that everyone works and no one cares, in the sense that care was turned into a job. Rather, the idea is that everyone works and cares, combining the two, and the workplace then changes to accommodate this fact, for example with shorter working weeks. There is some private care and some public care, and the state focuses on providing welfare support to cover those contingencies that can affect anyone, like illness, and to support those who cannot work and or provide care. I'll give Fraser the last word for this part of the lecture. Contra conservatives, the real free riders in the current system are not poor solo mothers who shirk employment. Instead, they are men of all classes who shirk care work and domestic labor. Part 3. Empirical work on femininity. To finish, I want to look at how social psychologists study femininity so that we get a sense of how the concept is operationalized by those who study it. I chose a paper about Swedish women because it's Swedish women who are so often cited as the best case for sex equality, by which such people tend to mean not just the country that is doing the best, but somehow also is the upper limit on how good any country can be. Those who invoke the gender equality paradox, wherein freer women choose sex-separated work more rather than less, often cite Sweden as their evidence. Although in the paper we're looking at, the researchers note that the World Economic Forum's 2015 Global Gender Gap Index ranks Sweden 4th, not 1st. The other three were Iceland, Norway, and Finland. The researchers from this 2017 paper state as their aim to investigate Swedish women's perceptions of and conformity to feminine norms. They state that every society has its socially enforced rules of what constitutes appropriate masculine and feminine behavior, and that these rules, referred to in the paper as gender role norms, have a profound impact on people's lives. They wanted to look at Swedish women's relation to norms of femininity and compare their perceptions and conformity to other research done on women in other countries. They talk about norms in terms of congruity. A person who conforms to the gender role norms for her sex will be positively evaluated, while a person who is non-conforming risks being socially excluded. So it's not just that there are ideas out there about what men and women are like or should be like, it's that the fact that there are these ideas creates incentives to conform and costs to not conforming. But because there is also a social hierarchy in valuing men and so masculinity over women and so femininity, there are both costs of non-conformity and costs of conformity for women. For in conforming, women accept the lesser power or control of women's lives. And the researchers note that some of the negative consequences that have been associated with conformity to feminine norms are body dissatisfaction, eating disorders, depression, and poor physical health. They use a pre-existing scale called the Conformity to Feminine Norms Inventory, which includes thinness, desire to be thin, investment in appearance, to improve appearance primarily by using makeup, sexual fidelity, to maintain sexual intimacy within one committed relationship, modesty, to refrain from calling attention to one's talents or abilities, romantic relationship, to express the need to be in a romantic relationship, domestic, to keep one's home clean and tidy, care for children, to enjoy spending time with and care for children, and nice in relationships, to develop friendly and supportive relationships with others. And here's their statement of the motivation for looking at Swedish women in particular. As gender equality ideals spread, behavioral differences between the sexes seem to diminish and dominant gender stereotypes become less distinct. Sweden is often classified as one of the most gender-equal countries in the world, and would thus make an interesting context for exploring conformity to feminine norms. They did 2 studies, the first measuring conformity to feminine norms using a shorter version of the Conformity to Feminine Norms Inventory called the CFNI 45, meaning it had 45 items rather than the original version's 84 items. Each item is scored on a 4-point scale, where 0 is strongly disagree and 3 is strongly agree, so higher scores indicate higher conformity. The CFNI 45 also separates the nice in relationships item into 2, relational, to maintain relationships, and sweet and nice, to be kind to others. Here on the screen for your reference is the slightly different CFNI 45 version. The second study was based on interviews with groups of women to get a greater understanding of their perceptions of norms of femininity within Swedish culture. In the first study, there were 330 women aged between 20 and 22. Swedish women reported high conformity to domestic and sweet and nice, and low conformity to modesty and sexual fidelity. Overall, they were less conforming to norms of femininity than Canadian and US women in comparable studies. All of relational, sweet and nice, domestic, and care for children got high mean scores, over 2, which translates roughly to agree, the second highest answer on the 4-point scale, while modesty and sexual fidelity got the two lowest mean scores, closer to 1, which translates roughly to disagree, the second lowest answer on the 4-point scale. In the second study, there were 4 focus groups with 4 to 6 women each between 19 and 23 years of age. Feminine norms were explained to participants as messages that you hear being given to women in Sweden about how women are supposed to act, think, and feel. They discussed how present in Sweden they thought the CFNI 45 norms were, and whether they thought there were any not captured by the study. The women rated the norms of thinness and investment in appearance as being the strongest. The researchers say the results indicate that norms regarding appearance, i.e. thinness and invest in appearance, were perceived as most salient by participants. They added that in Sweden in particular, there's a norm on women to be high achieving, to do well in all domains simultaneously, career and home. They thought that being thin and beautiful compensated for not being feminine in other ways. They commented on the pressure to conform to norms of appearance while pretending not to, presenting the desire to be thin as the desire to be healthy, wearing makeup in a way that makes their beauty seem natural, avoiding being looked down on for spending time on something as superficial as their appearances. Because the women interviewed were young, they acknowledged that some norms would probably become more important when they were older, especially domestic, care for children, sexual fidelity, and romantic relationship. Another norm mentioned only in the discussion section of the paper was a norm about sexual behavior. While Swedes seemed more liberal about sex, going by the sexual fidelity norm, women said there was pressure to be sexually active, but not too much so, and also to be discreet about it. Finally, Swedish women noted that modesty was a cultural norm more so than a feminine norm specifically. The researchers conclude that their study's results support the notion that as equality ideals spread, differences between the sexes diminish and gender stereotypes become less prominent. They also note that Sweden is not, in fact, sex equal. Although Sweden is more gender equal than most other countries, it is far from a gender equal society. For instance, it is more common for women than men to take parental leave, and men tend to earn more than women with the same occupation. Furthermore, in recent years, there has been an increased sexualization and objectification of women in Swedish media that has been suggested to contribute to the reproduction of gender inequality. Hence, Swedish society holds a perception of gender equality which is not always represented in the everyday life of Swedes. Because the study was more about what norms there are, it didn't comment on whether participants themselves endorsed the norms. As in, did they think there is a norm that women should remove body hair, or did they think women should remove body hair? That would be an interesting separate question. Are people aware of the norms operating as norms and simply making rational decisions about whether they can afford the costs of nonconformity, or are there significant numbers of people who internalize the norms and think they're just the way things are or should be? My dad found this book in a New Zealand op shop and bought it for me, and while it is pretty unsympathetic to feminism, there is one cartoon that makes a point that is useful to us. There's a scan in one of my Quillette columns from last year that I'll link to in the video description if you want to see the whole thing, but here I'll just put it frame by frame onto the screen and hope that you have enough time to read it. The serious point here being that when it comes to the project of gender abolition, feminists are at risk of being in a double bind, where if they embrace femininity, they are accepting their own oppression, and if they reject it in favor of masculinity, they are merely imitating their oppressors. Neither alternative is appealing. I don't think there is any easy answer here, and I'm inclined to think that both positions are overly simplistic. Gender abolition will require a radical rethinking of what we want to be like as persons, outside of the two types of persons framework. Let me finish with a couple of recommendations for those who want to think more about women without compulsory femininity. In lecture 4, I mentioned Joanna Russ's book, The Female Man, which combines 4 different worlds with varying degrees of female freedom, in one of which women have seceded from men into their own territory. There's also Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is a remote, women-only territory and presents the lives Gilman imagines women living without men. They are fit, capable, self-sufficient, they wear comfortable clothing and have short hair. And there's the Netflix movie I Am Not an Easy Man, in which a man bangs his head and wakes up in a world in which the sex roles have flipped.